morning. Sartre was wrong. He said hell is other people. The truth is that we need other people and they need us. Our need for relationship may in fact be growing in this decade because evidence suggests that our social isolation is increasing. People in developed countries are spending less time with family and friends. They're less engaged in social clubs and civic organizations, and they have fewer close friends than people did in previous decades. We don't know yet whether or not social media like Facebook is going to make up for this increasing social isolation. What we do know is that enhancing both the quality and the quantity of our relationships will significantly improve our future happiness and well-being in the years ahead. This morning, I want to share with you 3 scientifically proven strategies that you can use to make your good relationships even better. People with friends do better. A rich social connection will reduce the health risk from everything from the common cold to strokes. Lonely people are measurably less healthy than people with friends. Single men die sooner than married men do. The presence or absence of relationships in our lives improves our well-being more than our income does. Most of us today, think about this, most of us here today are going to live well into our 80s and beyond. Half the people born in developed countries in 2007 will live to see 100. Half. Whether those longer lives are going to be a blessing or a curse, a joy or a tragedy, are going to depend in part on decisions that we make today. Strengthening our relationships will do a great deal toward making our longer lives much more of a joy. So I know your relationships are good, but I believe they could be fantastic. Let me share with you how. First, what's your Laseta ratio? This is the number of positive to negative comments in your daily interactions with people that you talk to. Positivity is powerful. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's now well-known studies demonstrated that simply counting the number of positive and negative comments made in an interaction could predict significantly larger positive outcomes for individuals, couples, and even companies. Barb and her team, they go into Fortune 500 companies and they attend business meetings where they listen to everything that's said and then transcribe it. And then they count just the number of positive words versus negative words that are said in the business meeting. And on the basis of that Laseta ratio, they can predict which companies are going to do better financially. It turns out that companies with a ratio of 3 to 1, that's 3 positive comments for every criticism or negative comment, do better financially than companies whose ratio is less. Similarly, John Gottman, who is a well-known marriage therapist and does research on marriage stability and relationships, he observed something very similar in his Love Lab in Washington, where he does research. His team found that a ratio of 5 positive comments for every criticism that people exchange in relationships, whether you're newlyweds, engaged, or been married for 20 years, predicts a loving and healthy marriage or divorce. It turns out that a ratio of 5 to 1 will predict a loving and healthy marriage. 1 to 3, only 1 positive comment for every 3 criticism predicts divorce. Imagine this, John Gottman and his team can predict with 90% accuracy which newlywed couples will be divorced in 4 to 6 years, just on the basis of their comments, their ratio of comments and criticism. They can also predict with similarly high accuracy what married couples will still be married 7 to 9 years later. So it's not lack of conflict that makes for good relationships, but the balance of positive to negative comments. The Laseta ratio helps us make sense of the disturbing finding that as an occupational group, lawyers have the highest rates of depression, divorce, and suicide than any other occupational group. It's because they spend their day in interactions with low Laseta ratios. It's the nature of their job. So think about right now your closest relationships. What does your Laseta ratio look like? Are you spending more time criticizing, scolding, blaming, or accusing than you are validating, supporting, or encouraging? Most of us pattern our communication on what we observed in our families growing up. Families are the first place that we learn about relationships. Some of us were raised in homes where what was modeled was little positive expression. Others of us are from cultures where the norm is to express more criticism than expressions of affection or support. What we need, though, is a ratio of positivity that's at least 3 times as much positive as negative in order to maintain strong relationships. A minimally positive ratio is necessary to succeed. A strongly positive ratio is necessary to thrive. Tiny interactions can have a big impact. Now, most of us have more positivity than negativity in our relationships, but many of us are well below the 3-to-1 tipping point that is needed to maintain strong relationships. Now, in addition to increasing your positive comments, you can also practice something that's called active constructive responding. It's simple, and when I explain it to you, you're going to say, well, I do that, and you probably do, but you need to do it a lot more often. It will make your best relationships even better. Psychologist Shelley Gable at the University of California has observed that what we say to one another when things go right makes a big difference in how weak or strong our relationships become. Active constructive responding is the key building block to building good relationships. Here's the gist of it. Let's say that your neighbor shares that her son got an award at school. When people share good news with us, we have 4 ways that we can respond. Active constructive responding, passive constructive responding, active destructive responding, and passive destructive responding. Let's work with a few examples to clarify it. So your neighbor shares with you that her son won an award at school. You might say something like, well, congratulations, or good for him, or that's nice. Some of us might not say anything at all, though. We might change the subject. We might say, did you see the paper this morning? That's being passively destructive. It doesn't even acknowledge the speaker's comment. People feel rebuffed by these kinds of responses. And sad to say, some people are just so unhappy or just plain mean that they feel compelled when they hear about somebody else's good news to deflate that person's happy balloon. That's active destructive responding. That'd be like saying, well, every child gets that award eventually. Or, my child got that award last year. Or, they must have felt really sorry for him. Active constructive responding not only acknowledges and affirms the other person, but also engages the other person. We invite them to be in relationship with us. So when your neighbor tells you that her son got an award at school, you can say something like, that's wonderful news, I bet you're very proud of him. And then ask her to tell you something about her son. Or if your colleague or classmate says that their neighbor made them some herbal tea when they were not feeling well last week, say, that was very thoughtful of your neighbor, you're lucky to have such a good neighbor. And then ask, are you feeling better this week? To be actively constructive in our responses takes us beyond acknowledgement to affirmation and invitation. Maybe you were raised in a family where people loved and supported one another, but didn't really say very much. Maybe they didn't say anything at all. If so, active constructive responding might feel a little awkward to you initially, and you maybe even today doubt that it will make any difference, but you don't have to take my word for it. You can conduct your own experiment. Try it and see what happens. Acknowledge, affirm, and invite. Beginning today for a few days, when someone shares good news with you, acknowledge their comment, and then invite them to tell you more about them. Tell them about what happened. And then see what their reaction is to your invitation and see how you feel about their response. I'm convinced you'll be hooked. Finally, I've mentioned paying attention to your positive and negative comments, practicing active constructive responding. The third thing is to practice forgiveness. Forgiveness is more than getting rid of bitterness, resentment, retaliation, or revenge. It's about moving toward positive feelings or feelings of goodwill toward the person who has hurt us. When we genuinely forgive someone, we remain open to the relationship, regardless of the other person's response to us. An Amish community in Pennsylvania in 2006, you may remember this, they made international news when a man walked into one of their schools armed with an arsenal of small weapons and killed 4 children and seriously wounded 5 others. The Amish believe that forgiveness is a long process and sometimes a painful one that often begins with an intention to forgive. The Amish demonstrated their own forgiveness of the shooter by doing 3 things. One was they refused to degrade him or to say anything bad about him. 2, they attended his funeral. And 3, they designated some of the monies that had poured in to support the families of the murdered children. They designated some of that money to the shooter's widow and his children. Forgiveness is one of the strong suits of people who do well later in life in longitudinal studies of healthy aging. Maybe you find it hard to forgive. If so, you're not alone. Many people find forgiveness difficult because they misunderstand what it means. Robert McGee, who's a well-known counselor and a writer, he has shared some common mistakes that people make surrounding forgiveness. I have time this morning to share 3 of them with you. The first is that they think forgiveness is a feeling. The second is that they believe forgiveness means to not feel upset about what happened. And the third is that they believe that to forgive means you have to trust the other person or be friends with them. Well, first of all, forgiveness is not a feeling. It's a decision. It's an act of the will. And it's possible to forgive and still feel upset about something. In fact, if something very serious, some serious harm has been done to you, you might feel very upset for a long while, but it's still possible to forgive. In cases of serious offenses, it can take weeks, months, and sometimes years before painful feelings dissipate. Forgiveness is always a process. And in some cases where there are serious betrayals, people find that they need to forgive the person over and over and over again because when the memory of the offense comes up, strong emotion rises up. And people find they are tempted to retaliate or get revenge in their minds or in their hearts. So it takes time before painful or intense feelings abate. And to forgive does not mean that you have to trust. You don't have to be friends with someone who is bent on harming you. That would be stupid. You may need to make some adjustments in the relationship, though. Trust is established over time, and when there's a serious betrayal of trust, it takes time to establish it again. Sometimes it takes years, and there may be situations in which it's not possible to ever fully restore trust again, or wise to do so. And so to forgive does not always mean that the relationship is restored, although often that's the case. Growing our capacity for forgiveness facilitates healing relationships which enrich our lives. People are changed just by being in relationship with other people. There's something about being with people who see the potential in us that transforms us. The more friends you have and the more love in your life, the less illness you will likely have. Rates of cancer, heart attacks, and survival are better for those in a committed relationship. Strong, positive relationships are associated with greater happiness, better quality of life, and resilience. Thank you very much.